Hey guys. Tonight, we slide into the shadows. You're not walking along Rome's glittering marble roads or lounging in a senator's garden. No. Tonight, you're following torchlight down a damp corridor. Boots slipping on moss-covered stone. The air thick with mildew and something far older. Ahead, a rusty iron grate groans on its hinges. You step inside. There's no bed. No straw. No trial date penciled in. Just the smell of old blood. Stale sweat. And the quiet. Oppressive company of forgotten names. This isn't just any Roman dungeon. This is where Rome's political prisoners went. Not criminals in the ordinary sense, but people who thought the wrong thought, spoke the wrong truth, or simply stood in the way. You are in the belly of a system that perfected the art of being civil while being utterly cruel, and you, unlucky soul, are now a name on a scroll tucked inside a magistrate's sleeve, maybe, if you're lucky. But you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always wild to see where these stories are echoing from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is how slowly everything moves. Rome is in no hurry to kill you. Political prisoners aren't meant to go out with drama. Rome saves that for gladiators and emperors. You're meant to wither quietly. In fact, many political detainees weren't even publicly acknowledged. You just stopped being invited? Your name was mumbled in atriums. And then, not at all. It's like watching your own ghost haunt dinner parties you'll never attend again. Political imprisonment in ancient Rome was never codified the way you'd expect from a so-called republic that prided itself on law and order. It wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about inconvenience. You'd crossed the wrong person, maybe called out a corrupt governor, questioned an edict, or opposed a war, or, more dangerously, you were simply admired a little too much by the wrong people. The historian Tacitus once said that under emperors like Tiberius, even silence could be treason. And he wasn't being poetic. If you looked grim while the emperor smiled, if you stayed seated too long after a toast, congratulations. You just volunteered for indefinite detention? Nah. Charges filed. No trial scheduled. Just a polite knock on the door at dusk. And then 2 lictors escorting you to protective custody. And here's the kicker. You were often told it wasn't a punishment. You were simply being detained for safety. Yours, or the empire's, was rarely clarified. By the time your family started asking questions, they were often told you'd been moved. Then relocated. Then undocumented. And then silence. Historians still argue whether these political disappearances were systemized acts or chaotic byproducts of Rome's swirling elite rivalries. Some see it as a conscious shadow policy. Others blame overzealous underlings acting in fear of imperial displeasure. The truth, somewhere in between. Rome was excellent at not documenting certain things. That was half the magic. Let's talk about where you are now, the Tullianum. Better known as the Mamertine prison. It's small. Shockingly so. Dug into the Capitoline Hill like a festering wound. It wasn't designed for long-term stays. It was for containment before execution. But over time, the line between temporary and forever blurred, Your feet slide on the damp stone. You run your fingers along gouged walls. Some scratched with names. Some with desperate prayers. You think of Peter the Apostle, who tradition says spent his last days here. He at least had the luxury of a written fate. You might not even get that. The graffiti here isn't literary. It's scratchy, uneven, sometimes just fingernail marks. It's the language of vanishing. Some prisoners were important enough to be fed by servant senators, former consuls, and provincial governors, but don't mistake that for kindness. The food could be tainted, bread soaked in venom, mushrooms spiked with arsenic. One bite, and your natural death would be filed away neatly. Historians have a nickname for that kind of exit official suicide. A Roman favorite. There's a fringe theory barely footnoted but too poetic to ignore that some prisoners faked madness to avoid execution. Pretending to babble. Drool. Lose track of dates. Why? Because the mentally unfit couldn't be formally tried under Roman custom. So yes, some prisoners sang lullabies to walls, muttered nonsense about Cato's ghost, or how Jupiter owed them rent. And sometimes, just sometimes, it bought them another week of breath. Outside your cell, life in Rome blazes on. Senators debate tax reforms. Gladiators train in the morning sun. And the baker down the road perfects his honey loaf. No one is thinking about you. That's the brilliance and cruelty of Rome. You don't die with spectacle. You're just quietly deducted from the world. But let's step back for a second. How did Rome end up here? A republic that once prided itself on checks and balances now quietly throttles its thinkers. Part of it lies in fear. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't just end a war. He rewrote how politics worked. Power began concentrating in tighter circles. Loyalty became transactional. And suspicion, that became a currency all its own. Even in the early empire, emperors like Augustus cloaked suppression in restoring order. Political exile flourished under his rule. He'd banish rivals to islands sometimes tropical, sometimes desolate. They weren't killed. Not outright. But they weren't living either. It's hard to inspire rebellion when you're shouting into sea, wind, and rocks. You think about that now? Sitting in your cell. The torchlight from the hallway flickering. You wonder which one you'll get execution. Exile. Or endless waiting. The truth. Even your captors might not know yet. Decisions like these didn't come down from on high. They floated through whispers, rumors, and backroom deals. Your fate is probably being negotiated over wine somewhere on a hilltop villa, between two men who don't remember your name. So you wait. You breathe shallow. You count scratches in the wall. You hear water dripping somewhere. Methodical and uncaring. And you realize Rome doesn't kill you with swords. Rome kills you with time. You're not even a person anymore. Not really. In the corridors of Rome's elite, you've become a metaphor. A symbol. A tool. The whisper of your name makes someone else seem loyal. A nod toward your alleged crimes buys someone another week of safety. Welcome to the world of enemies of the Senate, a designation as slippery as an eel and twice as dangerous to catch. The Roman Senate, in its twilight form, is a strange beast. It still holds prestige. Sure, old patrician names and grand rhetoric echoing through the curia. But beneath the marble and mosaic lies a mess of jealousy, vendettas, and desperate self-preservation. And if the emperor frowns too long in your direction, senators trip over themselves to help finish the job. You're not alone in this. Remember Cicero, the silver-tongued orator who loved the sound of his own moral compass? Well, he became an enemy of the Senate twice. Once for executing conspirators without a trial. Then again, for opposing Mark Antony too passionately. His end, hunted down. Hands and head chopped off. And nailed to the rostra for birds to pick at, while his enemies smirked. But you don't have Cicero's fame. You're not a martyr, just a minor inconvenience. And the Senate has gotten better at dealing with people like you. Les dramas? More paperwork. Or sometimes, no paperwork at all. See? The Senate didn't need direct proof of treason. A gesture would do. A vagliter, an overheard toast. Even a dream, if reported by a priest, could become the smoking spear. And once someone called you an inimicus publicus enemy of the state, you entered a legal vacuum. You had rights? Technically. But technicality in Rome is just another way of saying, we'll get to it after lunch. Which means never? One of the most terrifying tools in the Senate's drawer was the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree. Think of it as Rome's version of martial law. It authorized consuls to see that the Republic suffers no harm. That sounds noble. In practice, it gave them license to imprison, exile, or quietly erase whomever they wanted. No judge. No jury. Just a nod from a few anxious old men. Historians still argue whether this decree was ever meant to authorize executions, or if it was just abused by ambitious power players. Either way, by the time it reached your ears, if it ever did, it was already being used to justify your absence. And here's the delicious irony. The Senate often didn't kill its enemies outright. No? No. Death is too clean. Instead, they'd ruin your finances, freeze your estate, declare your family's name, damnatio memoriae, damned in memory. They'd strip your statues, scratch out inscriptions, and pretend you never existed. Not even bad enough to be remembered. Just missing. There's a fringe case that still makes historians squirm, the case of Gaius Silius, not the lover of Messalina, his father. Silius was a respected general, successful and patriotic. But then he disagreed with Tiberius's policies. Bad move. Suddenly, whispers about financial corruption started surfacing. No proof, just allegations. And then the Senate convened, not to discuss the matter, but to agree the matter had already been settled. Silius was dead within days. Suicide, or maybe encouraged suicide. Romansurs never quitte allein. And then there were the novus homo, the new men. Ambitious climbers without ancient lineage. They made for perfect scapegoats. Too proud. Too fast. Too en familiar. They threatened the old guard. So, if one rose too high, you'd often find them mysteriously charged with misusing public funds. Or worse, conspiracy against the state. The punishment? Death. Exile. Or a slow vanishing into a provincial outpost from which they'd never write again. Even the accusations themselves were strategic. Senators would often wait until a rival left town, maybe on a diplomatic mission. Maybe a religious retreat, and then slap them with charges in absentia. The accused wouldn't even know until they returned. only to find their villa emptied and their name already disgraced. That's the genius of it. Destroy the reputation first. Let the body catch up later. Now, you might think, well, surely some senators pushed back, defended the accused, tried to restore the dignity of Roman law. Yes, sometimes. But those who defended political prisoners often found themselves under scrutiny next. The Senate operated like a self-scrubbing wound. Touch the infection too boldly, and it spreads to you. Even Cicero, when not being hunted, warned about the Senate's tendency to eat its own. He once joked, "Among us, even the walls have ears." And while it might have been a metaphor, historians now believe the forum's columns were used to funnel whispers directly toward key listening posts. Literal ancient eavesdropping. If true, it means that calling someone a traitor might have required nothing more than a well-placed whisper and good acoustics. You sit now, in your cell, or perhaps in a remote villa under surveillance, or aboard a boat to some sad little island, and think, who was it? Who named you an enemy? Your brother-in-law? That senator you mocked after too much wine? The aide who hated how you rolled your scrolls? And worse, was it ever about you? At all? Because that's the final cruelty of being a political prisoner in Rome. It wasn't always personal. Sometimes you were just part of a trade. A gift to an emperor's friend. A concession in a deal between governors? Or maybe your imprisonment proved someone else's loyalty. A sacrificial offering. Not to gods, but to men, with thin lips and deep pouches. And yet, Rome always gave itself an out. If questioned, there would be a note unsigned. A hearing, unrecorded. A crime unspecified. The more vague the charge, the more airtight the punishment. You now understand why political prisoners didn't resist. There was nothing to resist. No court to plead before. No law to cite. Just a slow aching on being. But not everyone vanished. Some returned. Some were spared. Or forgotten. Or forgiven when tides shifted and emperors died. But those few, when they did come back, were often hollow-eyed. They didn't speak much. They avoided politics. Some even refused to attend dinner parties. Because once you've been named an enemy of the Senate, you never stop listening for the next whisper. It's been weeks, maybe months. Time in captivity slips from the fingers like water through a bronze sieve. Your ears pick up the faintest sounds now, the roll of a cart above, the uneven pacing of a bored guard, the hiss of a torch guttering out. You wake each day to the same stale taste in your mouth, the same stiff bones, the same question. Will they kill me today? Or worse, remember me. And then, one morning, or perhaps night, who knows anymore, a visitor arrives. Not a friend, not a lawyer, a priest. He offers you bread, a few muttered words, and a charge impietas. Impiety, that's it. One word. No evidence. No explanation. Just a ceremonial accusation that your actions, or more likely, your opinions offended the gods and endangered the sacred harmony of Rome. A crime so vague it can stretch to fit anything from skipping a public sacrifice to criticizing imperial policy. Or, let's be honest, being in the wrong toga, at the wrong feast. The charge of impietas was the Swiss Army knife of Roman political suppression. It could be whispered behind closed doors, shouted from a podium, or scrolled in a letter to the Senate. One senator once called it the slipperiest accusation in the empire. Another called it useful. Guess which one lived longer? The charge stuck because Rome was obsessed with order, cosmic order. The state and the gods were inextricable. If you defied the emperor, you weren't just challenging politics. You were shaking the heavens, and the gods, supposedly, didn't like being rattled. So naturally, you had to be silenced before thunderclouds gathered over the forum. Take the case of Claudia Pulchra, a woman of noble birth, and cousin to Agrippina the Elder. She was accused of impiety after allegedly using magic to curse Tiberius. Yes, magic. Not even bad magic. Just suspicious herbs and whispers. No surprise she was exiled. Her name erased from records. Her servants tortured. One of them supposedly confessed to nothing, which was taken as everything. Historians still argue whether Impietus charges were sincerely believed by the public or just cynical tools of power. Some point to authentic records of priests declaring omens disturbed, birds flying wrong, or in trails off message. Others suspect the entire system was theater, a divine smokescreen masking secular ambition. Fringe scholars even claim that certain augurs Rome's bird-interpreting officials were secretly paid off to deliver bad omens at just the right moment. Whatever the truth, once the word impietus was attached to your name, things moved fast. Senators had an easier time voting against you. Crowds, whipped into pious frenzy, no longer questioned your absence. You weren't just inconvenient, you were unclean, and cleansing Rome of spiritual pollution. Well, that sounded noble, didn't it? Back in your cell, the air feels heavier. You're wondering if you'll be marched to trial or to the river. Sometimes, though, you're not killed. Not right away. Sometimes Rome prefers a more elegant solution. Which brings us to the cruelest fork in your road: exile or execution. If you're lucky, truly, politely lucky, they'll offer you a choice. Public disgrace, followed by quiet removal to some island. Or the honorable act of falling on your sword. Though, often, no, sword is provided. Let's say you choose exile. You pack what you can, say your quiet goodbyes, and board a boat to a wind-blasted rock. You're technically alive. You can write letters, plant a garden, feed birds, but your property in Rome is seized. Your family is watched. Your letters are delayed, and sometimes, when you finally manage to grow tomatoes, a new emperor decides your name still bothers him and sends someone to fix that. Remember the poet Ovid. He was exiled to the edges of the Black Sea for reasons still unknown. The official charge, a poem, and a mistake. That's all we got. Historians have spent centuries trying to decode what that mistake was. A scandalous affair, a political joke, a too-close-to-truth satire, whatever it was. Ovid begged to return for years. He never did. Or take Seneca the younger philosopher. Tutor to Nero. He was exiled for alleged adultery with Julia Livilla. A convenient reason. Years later, he was recalled to Rome, rose in influence again, and eventually, you guessed, it forced to commit suicide when Nero got jumpy. The sword of Rome is long and flexible. Sometimes, it just takes the scenic route. And if you choose execution, that's rarely dramatic either. You won't get a Colosseum crowd. Maybe a guard with a jug of wine. Maybe a blade borrowed from a gladiator. You might be allowed to write a will. to hug a son. Or maybe not. There's a niche historical theory that Rome's elite secretly preferred execution to exile because it left fewer loose ends. Dead men don't build rival networks. They don't write spicy memoirs. They don't come back when political winds shift. Dead men, in short, are tidy. You don't feel particularly tidy. And so, you do what every prisoner in your position has done before. Wait. Wait for a verdict. Wait for a change of heart. Wait for death. You practice both endings in your head, your final speech if granted an audience, your quiet nod if handed the cup of hemlock. You even imagine exile as a kind of freedom. Maybe the birds sing sweeter outside Rome, but you know better. You know that exile is just waiting with salt in the wind. There's something about a cell that teaches you patience. Or maybe it teaches you to perform patience because panic, real panic, has nowhere to go. It builds up, then collapses in on itself, like the quiet implosion of a dome. You've lost track of the days again. The only time markers are meals. If you can call a crust of barley and thin soup a meal, but then, one morning, you hear footsteps, louder than usual. Leather soles. Heavier, not a guard. Two men appear at the door. One holds a scroll, the other, a sword. They don't speak. You're led from the cell, not to the forum, not to a court, but into the heart of an old stone building, the lower chamber of the Tullianum. Cold, circular, rumored to be built by the kings of Rome. You can smell moss and metal. This place was never meant for speeches. It was meant for final acts. Welcome to waiting in the Tullianum, where time isn't just lost, it's erased. The Tullianum was Rome's most infamous prison. But don't let the word prison fool you. It wasn't a place you stayed for long. It was where you went to be held just long enough for execution. In theory. In practice. Though, political prisoners sometimes lingered for weeks. Even months. While the empire decided what was more useful, your silence or your suffering. You can still see the deep gouges on the walls, scratches left by fingernails or knives, or broken spoons. Some in Greek, some Latin. One, just a series of tally marks too many to count. It's said that Jugurtha, the defeated Numidian king, was thrown into the Tullianum, naked and starving, left to die in darkness. Another version claims he was strangled. Nobody knows for sure. Rome didn't keep good notes on the unglamorous bits. And that's the unsettling part. You're not in a place of justice. You're in a waiting room for non-existence. Sometimes, prisoners were simply forgotten. Out of sight. Out of mind. Until one day, someone remembered, oh, is he still alive? And sent a polite note to correct that oversight. One such man, a minor official from Hispania, was found starved in a cell, his bones curled around a dried sandal. No one ever discovered his crime. Historians still argue whether these delays were intentional, or just the inevitable chaos of Roman bureaucracy. You'd think the world's most advanced empire could keep track of a few prisoners, but Rome was a machine, magnificent, but lumbering. Paperwork got misplaced. Governors died. Emperors got distracted by eclipses. Or orgies. Or both. And during all this, you waited. Not in chains. Usually, Rome found chains undignified for the elite. But indignity came in other forms. No bath, no blanket, no word from family. If you were lucky, someone bribed a guard to sneak in a scrap of news, a coin, a fig. Sometimes just a whisper, they haven't forgotten you. It didn't matter if it was true. It gave you one more hour of breath. The cell's darkness wasn't total. A shaft of light fell from a grating above, casting a dim yellow beam onto the stone floor. You learned to measure its movement, to track time like a human sundial. When the light vanished, you slept. When it returned, you pretended to hope. But some prisoners didn't just wait. They wrote tiny letters, etched onto pottery shards or scraped into the underside of wooden bowls. Most were never found, but a few survived, discovered centuries later by archaeologists who almost threw them away. One fragment reads, "If my name is dust, let my words outlive me." Another, "I lied to stay alive. ID honest?" And then there were the stories of prisoners taken out at night. No announcement. No procession. Just gone. Their cells filled by someone new the next morning. Sometimes the guards claimed they'd been released. But the other prisoners knew better. If you walked out in silence, it meant you left by the stone steps. Not the front door. Those steps led downward, to a pit where executions were carried out. Strangulation was common, quick, efficient, discreet. The man tasked with the deed was usually a low-ranking slave, blindfolded to avoid recognition. But sometimes, especially for nobles, death came by another hand, often a friend, a favor. They called it so the condemned could meet death with dignity, not at the hands of a stranger. You begin to wonder who might offer you that kindness. And then, one day, you're still alive. The gruel arrives. The shaft of light returns. No visitor, no verdict. Just the slow, aching persistence of your own breath. And you realize the waiting might be the real punishment, because while Rome was built on law, the law was often ornamental. Political prisoners weren't judged by rules. They were judged by convenience. If your death solved a problem, it came quickly. If your existence helped someone, you lingered. Like a card left in the emperor's hand, neither played nor discarded. And so you sit and scratch another mark on the wall and wonder what happens next. You've long passed the point of praying for justice. Now you just pray to be seen, to matter, even in a cruel way. Because the only thing worse than being hated by Rome is being ignored by it. But here's the thing. They do see you. You just don't know who sees you. Or when. Because your fate isn't written by judges. It's whispered by men with agendas and ears too finely tuned. And one type of ear is particularly dangerous, the delatores. Rome's infamous informants. They look ordinary toga, neatly folded, teeth polished, a polite smile always at the ready. But these were not your average gossipers. These were the snakes in your garden. The men who listened for words that could be twisted, paused to note the slightest slip, then rushed off to deliver your doom, wrapped in silk rhetoric. You could be condemned in an afternoon over a joke about the emperor's chin. The system loved them. Delatores got paid often richly. If their information led to a conviction, they received a portion of your estate. Land, silver, furniture. Even your slaves, Which meant, of course, they had every incentive to invent your guilt. And once they did, well, it snowballed. Some did it out of spite. Others, desperation. A few made it a career. Take Marcus Regulus. No, not the war hero. A professional accuser who made so many enemies that even Pliny the Younger, usually quite measured, called him a vulture in human form. Regulus could spin a sarcastic poem into a seditious plot, and the Senate. They applauded. As long as his claws weren't aimed at them. Historians still argue whether the delatores were just a symptom of a corrupt system or one of its key engines. Some defend them, arguing they helped enforce loyalty. Others call them parasites wrapped in law. One fringe theory even claims a secret network of delatores worked directly for certain emperors, an invisible intelligence network with scrolls instead of spies. And here's the kicker. Their accusations didn't need to be provable, just plausible. You once told a joke about a tax increase? You once sighed too long during a triumph parade? You once failed to toast the emperor's birthday? That's all it took. A name, a nod, a cleverly phrased report. The Senate didn't ask many questions when a wealthy estate was up for grabs. And once the accusation landed, good luck. Even if you were innocent. Even if you proved you were innocent. The stink of the charge lingered. People distanced themselves. Friends suddenly had errands to run. Dinner invitations vanished. Your name became something whispered. If at all. The Roman elite were masters of selective amnesia. That's what the delatores sold. In the end, not just information, but narratives. A way to frame events. To justify power plays. To turn political feuds into legal proceedings. It wasn't about truth. It was about credibility. And you were now a footnote in someone else's career. You think back, was it the dinner party where you argued about military spending? Was it the slave you dismissed last spring who sought revenge? Was it the rival who laughed too hard when you tripped on the temple steps? Maybe it was all of them. Now, in your cell or under house arrest, or confined to your villa, you understand why Rome never needed torture to extract confessions. The entire system was torture. The endless waiting. The whispers. The knock on the door that might come today or a year from now. Because once your name was in a delatus scroll, the next step wasn't a courtroom. It was a performance. You're summoned. Again. This time, not to the cellars or to the grating sunlit yard. No chains. No guards at your throat. Just a quiet escort through an unfamiliar corridor of painted columns and perfumed halls. The contrast stings who wears cinnamon oil in a building where people disappear. You're taken into a marble chamber with too many seats and not enough faces. At the center, raised slightly above the floor like a minor deity, is a curved wooden bench. You've arrived at the show trial, but don't let the name fool you. It's not really a trial. It's a spectacle. A drama written in advance. Its ending known by everyone except you. The purpose isn't justice. It's legitimacy. Rome loves to kill with paperwork. And it starts with silence. No lawyer. No advocate. You're told the charge is delivered by a man who doesn't look up from the scroll. Words like impietas, sedition, conspiracy, or, if they're feeling creative, un-Roman behavior, then comes the chorus senators pretending they haven't already decided your guilt. Some glance at you. Most don't. One old man sighs, like he's being forced to eat olives he didn't order. Then, a voice rises. It's the delator, playing his part with gusto. He doesn't speak like someone telling the truth. He speaks like a man composing a legacy. He recounts your offenses in poetic language, with just enough vagueness to let everyone imagine the worst. E quotes your jokes. Repeats your letters, some genuine, some fabricated. You hear your own words twisted until they feel foreign. You try to speak. You're told, wait your turn? Spoiler, your turn never really comes. You begin to recognize the choreography. One senator asks a question designed to reaffirm the delator's narrative. Another sighs. What has become of Roman values? One even nods sympathetically toward you before voting to condemn. It's all carefully paced, like a farce performed in togas. Historians still debate whether Roman show trials ever had the capacity to exonerate. Some insist a few did rare, usually when public opinion was too strong to ignore. Others say those acquittals were themselves planned to create the illusion of fairness. Fringe scholars go further. They suggest trials were often recorded not for legal records, but as political theater scripts, read later in elite gatherings as chilling reminders of who held the strings. But here's the part: they don't talk about the audience, because you're not alone. Slaves, scribes, spectators line the back walls. Some are just there to write everything down. Others are there to watch not justice, but obedience. These were curated crowds, invited to witness power in motion. Even if you're noble, even if you're famous, especially if you're famous, your humiliation is the point. And what's a performance without a finale? The verdict is read in a calm voice. You're guilty. Of course, maybe they suggest exile, maybe execution, maybe they recommend suicide, as if that's a gift. And just like that, the show ends. The senators file out like theatergoers leaving a dull tragedy. Your name is added to the record. Your fate sealed in ink. And the empire continues as though nothing happened. Noplos, just the soft shuffle of sandals on mosaic. You're taken back, not to your cell, but to a holding chamber, a place where condemned men wait for the paperwork to catch up to their fate. A bureaucratic purgatory. You might be there a day, a week, longer. Some prisoners go mad in the waiting. Some hope for a miracle. Because, believe it or not, miracles do happen. Occasionally, a new Emperor arrives. A powerful ally intervenes. A public outcry rare, but possible forces a delay. In those cases, a condemned man might find his sentence reviewed, or quietly reduced to exile, or even, in extreme cases, reversed. It's the exception that keeps hope alive. That cruel Roman genius of dangling the idea of mercy without offering it. And you cling to it, don't you? Because when everything is scripted, when justice is a mask worn by fear, hope becomes your only line that's not in the script. You lie awake that night on the stone bench of your holding cell, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. You trace them with your eyes like constellations. And for a moment, you imagine another version of this story, one where you stood in that chamber, spoke your truth, and were heard. But that's not Rome. Rome doesn't want your truth. Rome wants your performance. You're awake before dawn. But it hardly matters. There's no sky in your world anymore. Just torchlight. Dust. and the low clatter of sandals on worn marble. The door creaks. A guard appears. Eyes blank from years of doing this. He says nothing. Just gestuurd. You are not cuffed. You're not chained, but you're being moved. You assume it's execution. But instead, you're walked past the forum. Past temples still wet with morning mist, and into a grand atrium filled with quiet. Vines spill from columns. A soft breeze whispers through silk curtains. A steward in a crisp tunic bows slightly. Then directs you deeper. Welcome to house arrest. Roman style. It sounds almost pleasant, doesn't it? Compared to the Tullianum. It's paradise. No rats. No stench. No screams from the floor below. But don't be fooled. This is not mercy. It's surveillance wrapped in luxury. A prison without bars. Where every curtain has ears. The Romans had an unspoken rule. Certain people were too valuable or too dangerous to kill openly. Former generals. Senators. Scholas. Putsch. Their deaths could spark outrage. Uprisings. Or rumors too inconvenient to silence. So, instead of rope or poison, Rome used villas. You're confined. You're not allowed visitors without permission. Letters are inspected. Conversations with slaves are reported. Some days. The guards make themselves obvious, standing in doorways with arms crossed. Other times, they vanish entirely, only to have your words repeated by someone else days later. This is a cage made of uncertainty. And it's psychological warfare. The walls are decorated. The food is decent. The wine is passable. You're given scrolls. Allowed to walk the peristyle courtyard. Even to write, so long as you don't say anything. Dangerous. But it's not what they allow you that matters. It's what they can take away the moment you misstep. Historians still debate whether house arrest was seen as a kindness or a calculated cruelty. Some argue it offered dignity, a chance for reflection. Others see it as a strategic form of erasure, removing a figure from the public sphere without making them a martyr. One fringe theory even claims that some house arrests were never formally declared, just strongly suggested, relocations enforced by social pressure alone. Take the case of Thrasea Paetus, a senator known for his stoic philosophy and quiet opposition to Nero. He stopped attending Senate meetings. He refused to flatter the emperor. And so, Rome didn't jail him. It isolated him. Eventually, when the mood turned darker, they sent a polite order. Take your own life. He complied, writing philosophical thoughts until his final breath. Even his death was a kind of performance. Or consider Agrippina the Younger, once mother of the emperor, now confined to her coastal villa after falling out of favor with her own son. She was surrounded not by soldiers, but by servants, not interrogated, but watched. And when Nero finally decided her existence was too inconvenient, he didn't send an assassin. He sent a collapsing boat. An elegant gestuur of plausible deniability? You now understand the terrifying elegance of house arrest. It keeps you in the world. But just barely. You are visible, but unreachable. Present, but powerless. Even the architecture reminds you you're not free. The doors creak in a particular way. Certain rooms remain locked. Windows that once opened onto gardens now stare at stone walls. And always, someone is watching, though you rarely catch their eyes. Your days become ritual. Wake, pace. Eat. Stare. Repeat. You begin to speak only in short sentences, measured in tone. Every syllable could be a report. Every sigh, an interpretation. Even laughter becomes a risk. One badly timed joke. One letter too boldly written. And the villa becomes a tomb. And the worst part, you start to miss the Tullianum. Because there, at least, you knew you were a prisoner. At first, it's just a whisper. You catch it in the cautious tone of a servant. The too quick glance of a messenger. The suddenly closed doors as you approach a hallway in your own villa. You don't know what's being said, but you are the subject. You feel it in your bones, like a change in air pressure before a storm. And then, one morning, a letter arrives. It's not official, no seal. No, command. Just a folded parchment slipped under your door. It contains a single sentence. There are whispers in the Senate. That's never good. Because when the Senate starts whispering, someone is going to disappear. Again, and more often than not, it's the man who reads about it last. Welcome to the world of whispers in the Senate, where lives are ended not with blades, but with glances exchanged across marble floors. The Senate, in theory, was the heartbeat of Roman political life, a bastion of tradition, law, and reasoned debate. In practice, it was a den of terrified aristocrats, plotting clique, and occasional poetry contests thinly disguised as legislation. By the time of the early empire, especially under emperors like Tiberius and Domitian, the Senate had become a stage, and the most dangerous acts were silent. You see, the Roman Senate didn't need to vote for your death anymore. That power had been absorbed by the emperor, but what it could do, what it loved to do, was lay the groundwork, prime the narrative, set the trap. Like actors waiting for the signal, they played their parts with chilling precision. Let's say a senator wants you gone. Maybe you embarrassed him. Maybe your estate is too large. Or maybe someone important owes you a favor and he doesn't like that. The process begins subtly. A remark in the atrium. A vague question raised in committee. A concern about loyalty. Always posed in the third person. Then come the documents' forgeries. Often, letters said to be from you. Plans said to have been overheard. Maps. Lists. Half-true quotations from speeches you gave months ago. Bent to new purposes. One historian famously called these paper daggers easy to draw. Hard to trace. The beauty of it, from their perspective, is that no one acts alone. The Senate acts as a body, which means no single person is responsible. Everyone contributes just enough to be innocent. And when the emperor hears that many senators have concerns, well, that's all the justification he needs. Historians still argue whether these whisper campaigns were orchestrated from the top by emperors using the Senate as cover, or if they arose more organically, like mold on old bread. Some believe certain consuls specialized in crafting accusations. Others claim even the scribes got involved, subtly wording transcripts to emphasize guilt or suspicion. A fringe theory suggests there was an actual manual, a now lost scroll of senatorial strategies for silent elimination. It wouldn't surprise you. Back in your villa, you try to stay calm, you eat, you read, you smile when spoken to, but inside, Your thoughts loop endlessly. Who started it? Why now? Is it over? The not knowing is worse than the verdict. At least with a verdict, you can plan your final words. With whispers, you're just stuck. You try to contact friends in the city, no one replies. Or worse, they reply with bland phrases, "Hope you are well. Thinking of you." Nothing direct, nothing that risks association. One writes, "The birds have stopped singing in the Senate gardens." You almost laugh. Almost. There's a famous case of Lucius Piso, a senator known for opposing Nero. One day, he simply stopped being invited to meetings. No one announced it. No de cree. Just silence. He was soon discovered to be part of a plot. Executed within a week. Rome didn't need to prove guilt when it had momentum. The same thing happened to many others. Old friends. Respected orators. Men who had statues in the forum, all undone by silence. By implication. By that fatal phrase, "He was spoken of." Now, at night, you hear every creak in the villa as a footstep. Every bird cry as a signal. You dream of open scrolls dripping ink. Of senators with wax masks. Of your name carved into marble with a line through it. And then, one evening, your steward bows low and says, "There is a statue of you in the forum. It has been removed." You don't speak. Because in Rome, when your statue comes down, your body usually follows. They say poison doesn't scream. That's part of its charm. It's quiet. Its subtlety. Its refusal to break the peace. Unlike swords or ropes or fire, poison slips in without a ripple. Leaves no cries echoing through stone corridors. And in Rome, where dignity was everything and discretion was power, there was no better way to end a life. You've stopped eating the figs, because this is the part where you learn about poison in the cup, the final punctuation mark in Rome's silent grammar of death. The Romans had a long, complicated love affair with poisons. At times, they banned them. At other times, they brewed them in imperial kitchens. There were poison testers in every elite household, often slaves, sometimes relatives. Always expendably, but the very existence of the role tells you something. The threat wasn't just real. It was expected. For political prisoners like you, poison wasn't used to punish. It was used to erase and help. Let's say the emperor doesn't want your name on a formal execution list. Too public. Too political. Too complicated. Maybe the Senate hasn't quite agreed. Maybe your cousin is still popular. Or maybe you've done nothing but exist in the wrong generation. The solution? A bottle. A cup. A mouthful of honeyed wine. Just a little too sweet. It was often presented as a kindness, a way to choose your end. You'd be offered a drink, or sent a fruit basket, or gifted a flask of something from the East. Sometimes, it came with a note, for your health, and once it happened, your death could be called natural. No blood, no scandal. Just another citizen lost to stomach illness or exhaustion or the fevers. Historians still argue about the number of prominent Romans who were poisoned. Some say the lists are exaggerated, inflated by paranoia. Others point to the sheer frequency of sudden deaths. Healthy men, collapsing overnight. Entire families swept away over dinner. Officials dropping dead days after receiving imperial gifts. A fringe theory claims poison was even used during Senate meetings, added to the ink of wax tablets or smeared on the stylus handles. Whether that's true or just whispered terror, the fear was enough to change behavior. Senators stopped eating at banquets unless they brought their own food. Some only drank from sealed containers. A few had slaves test every dish, every drop, every fig. One famously licked only the corners of his meals. And the ingredients, Rome had a whole catalogue. Hemlock, famously used in Greek trials, was too crude for subtle work. The imperial favorite was aconite, also called wolf's bane, beautiful to look at, deadly to the touch. Then there was cyanide from peach pits, belladonna from nightshade, and the mysterious Succus taraxacii, a thick black syrup rumored to mimic fever before shutting down the lungs. The most terrifying slow poisons, taken in tiny doses, over days, even weeks. They mimicked illness. Your skin? Pallid. Your strength faded. Your breath shortened. And doctors, yes, even them could be bribed to call it natural. There's the case of Drusus the Younger, heir to Tiberius. Historians suspect he was poisoned slowly over several weeks by his own wife and Sejanus. The head of the Praetorian Guard, the poison made him irritable, then ill, then bedridden. No one suspected until it was far too late. By the time his tongue swelled, Rome was already preparing a funeral, not an inquiry, and that's the elegance of it. Poison allowed deniability. It allowed Rome to keep its marble clean. You wonder now about your own food. The bread is slightly softer today. The wine less bitter? That could mean nothing. Or it could mean everything. You take a sip anyway. Because what else is there? You can't starve yourself on suspicion. That's not survival. That's surrender. And yet, with every swallow, you listen to your body like it's a stranger. Was that a twitch? Was your heartbeat always this fast? Did your fingers always feel so cold? The worst part is, if it comes, you won't even know. You'll drift. Maybe sweat. Maybe shiver. Maybe die in your sleep and be buried at dawn. The guards will say you went peacefully. The steward will clean your sheets. The Senate will nod. The emperor will sip his own wine, unbothered. No one will scream, because poison doesn't scream. A letter arrives, folded neatly, sealed in plain wax. No crest, no name. The messenger doesn't speak. He places it gently on the polished marble table and disappears like smoke through a colonnade. You stare at it for minutes, maybe longer. The parchment feels heavier than it should. You break the seal. It says you are to be relocated. No explanation. No destination. No signature. Just those 4 words. And just like that, your fate begins to shift again. Not forward, not backward, but sideways, into deeper shadows. You already know what this means. The island tombs. Exile. Not into retirement, but into removal. Rome had no shortage of islands. Some were beautiful, lush, sunny, olive sweet with coastal breezes. Others, bare rocks with nothing but wind and goat bones. But for political prisoners, the island didn't matter. What mattered was what you left behind your family. Your voice? Your meaning? There was something symbolic about Rome sending its enemies across the sea. It wasn't just about geography, It was psychological isolation. Rome was the center of the world. To be cast from it was to fall off the map. You weren't just absent. You were unmade. You're given a small chest, a change of clothes, a scroll for the authorities wherever you land. No sword. No gold. The guards are polite, even apologetic. You notice? One doesn't meet your eyes. He's likely been ordered not to speak unless spoken to. You don't bother. What's left to say? The journey begins before sunrise. You're rowed to a transport galley, barely seaworthy, but fast. The soldiers guarding you are nervous. Not of you, of being associated with you. To transport a political prisoner is to flirt with contagion. Even their silence feels contagious. As the boat drifts from the Tiber out to the open sea, you glance back at Rome. The skyline blurs in the morning haze. The domes. The temples. The eagle standards. It all looks like a dream fading before waking. You wonder how many others looked back like this. How many cursed the wind for carrying them too fast? Or cursed it for being too slow? You arrive on the third day. The island is small. Wind-scrubbed. A few trees. A cluster of buildings part garrison. Part monastery. Part oubliette. You're shown to a room. Not a cell. A room. With a bed. A window. A table. No door on the inside. They lock it from the outside. You are free to walk the island during daylight hours, but only within the marked boundary. Beyond that, the cliffs, the sea, the silent agreement that if you fall, no one will come looking. This is not a prison in the legal sense. It's a custodial erasure. You meet a few other exiles, mostly old men, with faded tattoos and empty eyes. One woman, once a priestess, now collects driftwood in silence. No one speaks about why they're here. Some barely speak at all. You quickly learn the rules. Keep to yourself. Don't write anything down. And always assume the guards are listening. Even when they're not there. Historians still debate the true purpose of these islands. Some say they were meant to preserve a fragile appearance of mercy. Rome didn't execute its enemies. It just forgot them. Others insist these were open-air graves, designed to break spirits without staining public record. A fringe theory claims some islands were actually intelligence outposts, where spies monitored former elites for signs of rebellion or revelation. You don't know which is true. You do know the wind speaks louder than the people. Your days become slower than house arrest, more surreal than prison. You eat. You walk. You write messages in the sand and watch the tide erase them. You speak to birds. You forget the names of the months. And slowly, something inside you begins to shift. Not hope, not despair. Something colder. Something like detachment. One morning, you find a small rock placed at your door. A message. You don't know who left it. But carved into the surface are 3 simple words. You are nothing. It's meant to frighten you. It doesn't. Because, in some strange and perverse way, you've been preparing for this. Since the trial, since the first accusation, since the cell, the wine, the whispers, they never wanted you dead. They wanted you absent. And now, you are alive, breathing, forgotten. And that, in Rome, might be the most complete kind of death. You've stopped counting the days. On the island, time isn't marked by calendars or festival trumpets. Just the sound of waves dragging pebbles along the shore. The squawk of gulls circling overhead. And the slow decay of routine. The guards barely acknowledge you anymore. Even the other exiles keep their distance. Not out of hostility, but habit. Everyone here is in a state of slow undoing. Then one afternoon, a shadow crosses your path. Not a man. A boy. Barefoot? Maybe 10 years old. Carrying a basket of sea urchins. He's not a prisoner. He's not a guard. Just here. He glances at you and keeps walking. You ask the steward who he is. The steward shrugs. His father was accused of treason. The boy refused to leave. That's the moment you understand. This place isn't just for prisoners. It's for residue. And now you begin to notice the others. The children of those exiled. The slaves who followed their masters. The wives who could not, or would not, remain in Rome. They linger in this shadow world, attached not by law but by grief. Their presence is tolerated, but never acknowledged. As though exile was a contagion that spread by proximity, and some of them, especially the slaves, know everything. Because here's the truth. No senator ever dares write down many of Rome's most sensitive secrets. Its most damning whispers were carried not by scrolls, but by slaves who knew too much. Imagine you're a household slave, assigned to the baths or the study. You fetch wine, fold togas, adjust pillows. You're invisible. And yet, you hear everything. Plans whispered between senators. Arguments behind closed doors. Which priest was bribed? Which neighbor owns a scroll he shouldn't? Rome knew this. Of course. And so, when a political prisoner was arrested, the slaves were taken too, not as accessories, but as liabilities. Many were tortured. Some were killed. A few were simply sent into exile alongside their masters, with instructions to keep their mouths shut, or else you meet one such slave on your island. His name is Meritus. He limps slightly, speaks softly, and is missing part of one ear. He tells you he once worked for a magistrate accused of embezzlement. The magistrate killed himself before trial. Meritus, despite knowing nothing of the finances, was flogged and sent here anyway. His crime, proximity. Historians still argue about the legal status of these enslaved witnesses. Technically, Roman law allowed for their testimony under torture. Yes, you heard that right. A slave's words were not considered reliable unless their body had been broken first. Only after agony were their voices considered untainted. Some senators abused this liberally, torturing slaves, not for truth, but for confirmation. Others feared what might come out because torture was unpredictable. A slave could blurt out true things. Dangerous things. Things no one wanted in the record. One infamous case involved a slave girl named Philostrate, owned by a senator, implicated in a failed conspiracy. Under torture, she admitted that her master had plotted to assassinate the emperor. But she also claimed that half the Senate had known about it, and that one of them had given her the dagger. The guards stopped the interrogation. She was never seen again. There's a fringe theory too dark for most textbooks that some of these slaves were deliberately disappeared, not because they lied, but because they didn't. Rome was terrified of truth from the mouths of the lowly. You think of this now as Meritus scrapes barnacles from a rock and hums a song you vaguely recognize, a temple hymn, usually sung at funerals. He doesn't speak of Rome. He doesn't speak of his master. But once, when the wind howls louder than usual and you're both huddled under a crumbling portico, he turns to you and says, "We were never really theirs, but our silence was," and you realize this exile isn't about space, it's about memory. Rome doesn't just want you gone, it wants what you know to vanish with you. You start watching what you say, even to Meredith, even to the gulls. Because even on this island, miles from the marble and blood of the Senate, you don't speak freely. You breathe. You wait. You remember? But mostly, you don't speak. Some mornings you wake with the taste of metal in your mouth. Not from poison. Not from blood. From the sheer, stifling weight of silence. It wraps around your throat, not tight. Not cruel. Just firm. A presence. Like a hand reminding you that your voice doesn't matter anymore. But then, there's a knock. Not the knuckles of a guard, or the palm slap of a steward. This is something softer. Stranger, like someone politely borrowing the moment. You open the door and find a man holding a folded robe and a sealed document. He says only this: "You are pardoned." Pack light. It doesn't feel like rescue. It feels like strategy. Because this is how Rome works. One day, you're poison. The next day, you're useful. And that's when you learn the terrible truth about fake pardons. Real graves. You're being released. At least that's what they tell you. The robe is fresh. The sandals are new. The ship back to the mainland carries only 2 guards and a scribe. No manacles. No ropes. Just a quiet tension. Like everyone on board is part of a scene they've rehearsed badly. You reach the harbor at dawn. The mist makes everything look ethereal. Statues softened. Buildings smudged like charcoal drawings. You're led through a private entrance. Not into the city proper, but to a villa on the outskirts. No crowds. No triumph. No family waiting with open arms. The steward meets you with practiced warmth. "Har you wine?" Asks how the island was. Laughs a little too easily when you don't answer. You ask to see the pardon. "He hesitat this." Then hands you the scroll. It's sealed, but not by imperial authority. The wax bears no crest. The handwriting is elegant, but nowhere does it say your name. Just a name. A placeholder. You've been restored in spirit. Not in law. And in that moment, you understand? This isn't a pardon. It's a sentence postponed. Historians still argue whether these kinds of pardons were administrative errors, half-hearted gestures, or cold-blooded setups. Some claim they were test runs releasing political prisoners just long enough to see who flocks to them. Others insist the releases were designed to create trust, to expose deeper networks of dissent. Once revealed, the trap would spring. There's the case of Caecina Piedis, pardoned by Claudius after a long exile. He returned to Rome, smiled at the banquets, accepted the cheers until someone found a letter in his hand. Half burned, hinting at a conspiracy. Within a week, he was forced to commit suicide in front of his wife. The pardon, it was bait. You begin to watch everything. The food, the drink, the servants, your own shadow. People stop visiting you, old friends. Former rivals. They bring olives, gossip, sympathy, but no one stays long. And no one mentions politics. Every conversation is dipped in syrup and stripped of content. Then, one night, A different knock. The steward returns. No wine this time. Just an apology. And an offer. There's a chariot outside. You're expected? You're led down dark roads through winding hills. Past groves of sleeping olives and silent fountains. The city hums in the distance. But your route avoids it entirely. You arrive at a villa more opulent than yours. But with fewer windows. Inside. A table. A single cup of wine. You know what this is. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. The pardon that ends in an invitation. The dinner that begins with a toast and ends with silence. A god will appear. Or not. Maybe you'll be left alone. To drink or not drink. It doesn't matter. Because you've already been buried. Your estate was never fully restored. Your letters have been intercepted. You haven't received word from your family. Maybe they think you're already dead. Maybe they were told to believe it. You sit before the cup. It's warm, fragrant, familiar, and for the first time in months, maybe years, you laugh. A real laugh. Because you finally see it clearly. Rome doesn't care whether you live or die. It only cares that your usefulness expires on time. And in that moment, you decide you won't drink the wine. Not yet. Not here. Not this time. Because you have one more role to play. The returned exile. The quiet survivor. The inconvenient ghost who refuses to go quietly. You don't drink the wine. You sit with it. Let it cool. Let it steep in the quiet. Like truth itself. When the steward returns and sees the untouched cup, he says nothing. Just nods. And that's how you know they never expected you to choose silence over surrender. From that moment, everything changes. You're not escorted back to your villa. You're not taken back to the island. You're not even watched as closely as before. Because now, you're something else entirely, a problem that won't cooperate. And in Rome, problems that linger too long become less visible. It begins subtly. Letters stop arriving. Food tastes slightly off. Visitors drop to zero. Your name disappears from public records, not stricken through, just quietly absent. One day, you visit a bathhouse, and your usual attendant greets you a stranger. You smile, correct him, and he blinks, like he's forgotten. He hasn't. He's been told to forget. You're being erased in real time. There's a term for this in Roman political slang, subumbra under shadow. It referred to individuals the state no longer acknowledged publicly, but who were still very much alive. Men who had seen too much, or said too much, or, worse, done absolutely nothing, but reminded everyone of it. You are now a man living subumbra. Historians still argue how common this was. Some claim it happened only in the later empire. When bureaucracy outpaced reason, others believe it was always there. A feature of Roman politics from the Republic forward. A fringe theory suggests Rome intentionally maintained shadow registers, unofficial lists of those who must not reappear in conversation or correspondence, whether officially forgotten or strategically misplaced. Your existence becomes surreal. You walk through markets and no one greets you. You visit your old domus and find it occupied by a cousin who smiles too widely. You try to speak to a senator in the street and he adjusts his toga and turns his back. You go home. You stare at your walls. You begin to talk to them. You don't go mad, not exactly, but you become untethered, loosened from the grid of normal life. Not insane, just drifting. You write long scrolls to no one. Copy verses you once memorized as a child. You trace the name of your family on the table with your finger, over and over, until it leaves a groove. And then, one night, you wake up to a sound. A small one. Paper sliding. Feet retreating. At your door. Another letter. This one bears no name. But the seal is unmistakable. The Emperor's personal signet. Inside, only this. Stay quiet. Stay useful. Stay forgotten. You laugh. Of course. You finally understand your survival is the punishment because you know what they did. You know who paid the delator. You know what the vote count was, even if they burned the records. You know about the forged letters. The staged trial, the real grave that was dug and never used. You are the record they can't erase. But as long as you breathe, they must keep erasing. So, you do what they least expect. You disappear yourself. Not by dying, by fading just enough to keep them from acting. You change homes. You shave your beard. You stop writing. You smile when spoken to. Nod when recognized. And never say more than a sentence. And over time, a strange peace settles. You are a man without echo. A ghost in sandals. A statue still standing in a garden? No one visits? Rome forgets loudly. But it remembers quietly. And somewhere, in a backroom scroll house or behind a senator's eyes, your story is still flickering, dangerous, silent, and unrecorded. And that is the real threat. Because you've become something Rome cannot explain. You survived. You survived long enough to become a rumor. They whisper about you now. Not with your name. Of course your name has been exiled from polite conversation. Like a bad omen, but with titles. Vague and shifting. The one who walked away. The man beneath the decree. The mouth Rome could not close. Some say you died years ago. Others say you were pardoned and retired to the coast. A few say you were taken by the gods, apotheosis by rumor. You listen to these stories in the market under a different name, pretending not to react. You hold your breath as a merchant says. My uncle's friend's tutor once saw him thin man. Pale eyes. Kept pigeons and watched the sky. They never get your eyes right. But somehow, the pigeons are always true. You have become something rare in Roman politics. A living myth. And that, ironically, makes you dangerous again. Because now people remember you, not as a criminal or a traitor, but as a figure who was never broken. And in Rome, survival without permission is a kind of rebellion. That's how it begins again. Not with accusations. With questions, a scribe asks if you might be willing to share your version of the trial, quietly, off the record, a young patrician, wide-eyed and overconfident, begs you for advice on maneuvering the Senate. You smile and say nothing. A former slave slips a note into your basket of figs. They are afraid. What else do you know? And the worst part, you want to answer. Because years of silence haven't erased the truth. If anything, they've sharpened it. You remember every face, every voice, every betrayal cloaked in civility. You remember which senators smiled as they voted you away? You remember the tone of the delator's voice? Sweet as honey. Sharp as glass. You could write it all down. You should. But you don't. Because the moment it exists outside your mind, it becomes evidence of your usefulness, your threat, your persistence. And Rome has only two answers to persistence: use it or end it. Historians still argue whether men like you existed. Survivors of the silent machine. Some point to letters, faded and unsigned, written in your exact style. Others cite graffiti, short poems scratched into bathhouse walls or on the undersides of statues. He spoke. He said. They vanished. One fringe scholar insists you reappeared decades later under a new name, guiding a failed reform movement from behind the curtain. But no one agrees, because to acknowledge you would be to acknowledge the system's leak that a man could escape its grip, even quietly. You start to see your old life in fragments. A senator's face in a crowd. The scent of an ink you once used. A soldier wearing the crest of the cohort that escorted you to exile. You walk faster, talk less, keep your head low. But inside you is a catalogue of memories. Pages turning with every heartbeat. Then, one day, a visitor, unannounced, unrecognized. He looks like a merchant, carries no scrolls, says nothing until you close the door behind him. Then, they want your silence. They always did. But others want your memory. You say nothing. He places a small leather pouch on the table. Inside scrolls. Not written by you, but about you. Testimonies. Copies of charges. Half a confession from the delator. L'Enceinte dead. He doesn't ask for anything in return. Just leaves. And now you're faced with the impossible testimony without witness. What do you do with proof? In a world that fears your truth, you consider fire, burial, secrecy. But instead, you wait. Because you've learned Rome's real weakness, it forgets too quickly. And in forgetting, it makes room for return. So you place the pouch in a jar, seal it, and bury it under a fig tree you've been tending for years. The roots are strong. The fruit is sweet. The soil holds secrets. And as you press earth over the scrolls, you whisper, not yet. But one day, because Rome believes in marble and monuments, but sometimes, history grows in gardens. The seasons pass. The fig tree grows taller. The branches arch wider, casting a crooked shadow across the yard. You tend it daily, not out of sentiment, but out of habit. The buried jar beneath its roots doesn't hum or glow or whisper secrets into the night. It just rests, like you, like all the stories that sleep in Roman soil. But Rome never truly sleeps. One morning, there's commotion at the edge of town. Not soldiers, not senators, scribes, dozens of them, dispatched by a new magistrate with a hunger for revising the record. They say it's about honoring forgotten names, restoring justice, healing wounds. You know better. This is not a revival. It's a reshuffling, an inventory of silence. And what better way to polish an empire's face than to clean up its shadows? You watch them work. Interviewing. Recording. Pretending to care. A young woman among them notices you lingering nearby. She approaches soft steps. Warm eyes. No guards in sight. She smiles. Your name? Sire. You pose. Marinus. You'll lie. Offering a name you once heard in a tavern and kept like a charm. It means of the sea. You hope she hears poetry in it? She nods, unfazed. And were you ever involved in political matters? That's a dangerous question. You shrug. I had opinions. She laughs. Not cruelly. Kindly. Kindly. The way someone laughs at a harmless old man feeding pigeons. But her quill still scratches it down. Later that night, you dig up the jar. You hold the scrolls like bones fragile. Yellowed. Aching with potential. For a moment. You consider giving them to her, letting truth surface in an ocean of revisions. But no, not yet, because you've seen this before. Every so-called reform becomes a prelude to a new purge. Every fresh marble inscription is built on older, erased ones. And you have survived too long to be footnoted. Historians still argue about the scrolls you buried. Some say they never existed. Others say they were discovered during the Antonine reforms and used anonymously in Senate debates. A few even insist the woman scribe who spoke to you published them under her own name, disguising your voice as her own. If that's true, she vanished shortly after. But truth in Rome doesn't require survival. It only requires timing. And you are a man who learned to wait. You walk the edge of the market now like a ghost? You know how to blend, how to nod without speaking, how to appear interested without being remembered. You are present, but not accounted for. A living paradox. The Senate's error, the emperor's oversight. Sometimes, you pass by the temple steps and see young men debating law, quoting Cato, or Cicero, or Tacitus. They sound confident, eager, loud. They don't know that all of them are playing roles. They don't know that somewhere behind the marble, names like yours still echo muted, misquoted, but not erased. You sit by the fig tree one evening, alone. As usual, a child walks past, says you, and asks, "Are you the one who speaks to trees?" You smile. Sometimes they answer. She giggles and runs off. You hear her tell her mother, "That's the man who used to be important." The words sting, then soften, because in a way, it's true. You used to be important to Rome, to power, to outcomes. But now you are important in a quieter way. You are memory, sharpened by survival. Not every story has to end in fire. Not every truth must scream. Some truths grow quietly, inch by inch, waiting for the moment they're needed most. So you sit with your tree, the sun setting behind its crooked frame. You breathe in salt air and dust. You close your eyes, and in the dark behind your lids, the scrolls still burn, not in flame, but in meaning. Some nights, you dream of corridors, endless ones, marble-lined, torchlit, with voices at the edge of hearing. You walk them slowly, your sandals soundless on polished floors. Doors appear and disappear. Each one bears a name some familiar, others long buried in the graveyard of memory. But when you reach for the handles, your hands pass through them like mist. You always wake before the end. You don't tell anyone about the dreams. Who would you tell? You haven't spoken more than a dozen words a day in years. But the corridors stay with you. Not nightmares. Exactly, more like echoes of paths you never got to walk. And that's how you begin to think again of the execution without a trial. The other kind, the one no one talks about, it was never about public death. It was about removal without explanation. The disappearance that never happened. The body that wasn't found. The charges never filed. The death not acknowledged. A process so clean, so quiet, that even the victim might begin to wonder if he ever existed. You've seen it firsthand. You remember a man named Servius Tall. Affable. Unremarkable in every way except one. He once declined to endorse a senatorial proposal favored by the emperor. He wasn't loud about it. Just abstained. Politely. He disappeared that week. No one announced it. No charges were posted. His domus was quietly reclaimed by the state. His wife remarried. His name was never mentioned again. As if it had always been an awkward pause in a sentence Rome decided not to finish. Historians still argue about the legality of such removals. Some claim they were rare exceptions necessary to preserve stability. Others insist it was a system unto itself. A silent conveyor belt that carried undesirables off the stage. A fringe theory posits the existence of a shadow office, an unofficial praetorial desk responsible solely for undocumented purges. No scrolls, no stamps, just orders spoken and obeyed. It makes sense. You once asked a low-ranking official, quietly, if such things were real. He blinked too long, then said, if it isn't written, it isn't remembered, and then walked away. That's when you started to listen differently. You noticed which names vanished from conversation. You learned to interpret absence as an event. When no one mentioned a man who had been everywhere, you knew something had happened. When a seat at the baths remained empty, day after day, without question, you understood. And when one evening, the fig tree bore fruit that tasted strangely metallic, you wondered, was this meant for me or for someone else? You didn't eat the figs that day. You never do. No, until the birds do first. It's not paranoia. It's discipline, because you've learned what it means to be a man Rome can't quite get rid of, but would very much like to. And there's a special kind of threat in that limbo. You're not powerful enough to be hunted openly, but you're known enough to remain a liability. And so, you live carefully. You accept only what you can trace. You nod politely. You never give advice. Never lend money. Never sign scrolls. Because every choice is a document. And Rome has always loved documents, even when it hates them. In your quiet hours, you wonder how many others like you are out there wandering the fringes of empire, unreleased and unpunished. Perhaps there's a whole underworld of unjudged men, each carrying stories that would shatter marble if ever spoken aloud. You think maybe that's why Rome keeps expanding, not for glory, not for trade, but to make more room for the people it can't acknowledge. You close your eyes beneath your tree, the leaves rustle. The wind sighs like old vellum, and the roots press against your back like words never said. And you think there are worse things than dying, like being declared not worth the ink it would take to accuse you? Rain, for once, not the polite mist that kisses marble, or the sudden downpours that flood alleys. This is the kind that seeps into bone, that soaks the earth until it releases its secrets. You watch from under the fig tree, cloak pulled tight, and think Rome washes nothing away. It only buries deeper. And that's when you remember the names. the ones that were scratched off, chiseled out, buried under aliases. Rome was obsessed with permanence. Inscriptions carved into stone, statues standing tall, portraits in mosaics, busts in bronze. But when it wanted to destroy someone, it didn't burn their house or slay their sons, at least. Not first. It started with their name. Damnatio memoriae. The condemnation of memory. It sounds ceremonial. And it was. But it was also intimate, personal. Almost surgical. The Senate would issue a decree the name of the condemned was to be erased from all public records. Statues defaced. Titles revoked. Honors unmentioned. As if the person had never existed. You once saw it happen in real time. A man named Publius Nerva. A mid-level official. Popular. Thoughtful. Possibly too thoughtful. Someone accused him of sympathizing with a failed rebellion in Syria. No trial. No exile. Just a sudden vanishing of presence. His portrait removed from the library. His name chiseled out of a triumphal arch. His family forbidden to speak of him. Within a year, even the servants whispered. Who? And the worst part, it worked. People forgot. Even you forgot until the rain reminded you. Historians still argue about how effective Damnatio Memoria really was. Some say it succeeded only on the surface, that the names lived on in coded letters, in oral histories, in half-burned ledgers. Others insist the empire perfected the craft, turning human lives into palimpsests so well scrubbed, even grandchildren weren't sure if their ancestors had existed. One fringe scholar once claimed that Rome had a secret department scribes who specialized in memory destruction. Trained to rewrite history, not with malice, but precision. The way a sculptor might reshape a broken statue into a new god entirely. But you don't need theories. You lived it. You remember how fast names vanished once the Senate nodded? One day, a man was applauded in the forum. The next, his titles were reassigned, his home repainted, his birthday unmentioned. Even tombstones were adjusted a hammer to the nameplate. A vague line about a citizen of honor. And if he had family, they became awkward pauses in lineage. Fathers with no sons. Sons with no fathers. Wives rebranded as widows by accident. Children re-enrolled under new names. Whole identities rinsed like ink in the Tiber. You suspect some of them never truly knew what had happened. Only that the world turned grey. And colder. And smaller. And here's the irony sometimes. The condemned were already dead. Yes. Posthumous erasure. Rome wasn't content to ruin a life. It wanted to unlive it. You once stood before a temple where a statue had been hastily removed. Only the feet remained sandals, iron pins, and the vague outline of a name. The plaque beneath now read, "To the virtue of the people." But you remembered who it had been. A general named Tullus. Once praised for defending a province. He had died in battle. Then a new governor took over. And suddenly, Tullus was too close to the wrong decisions. So the Senate undied him. Turned him into an absence. You think now of your own name? Still yours. Technically. But spoken where, written where? The scrolls under the fig tree still carry it, but elsewhere. What name do the guards use when reporting to their superiors? What alias are you listed under in the census, if you're listed at all? You check your reflection in the puddle at your feet. You recognize your face? Barely. But would Rome? Would it see the man who once stood in the Senate hall, who once read aloud the tax code reforms, who once kissed his son on the steps of the Temple of Concord? Or would it see no one? Because to erase a name in Rome was to erase a witness. And Rome never liked to be watched for too long. So you sit in the rain, under the branches of a tree with roots deep in buried stories. You whisper your name aloud just once. The wind does not answer, but the roots seem to shift slightly. They remember. You used to believe in linear time. One moment followed another. Cause and effect. Action. Consequence. Now, after all this, you understand that in Rome, time folds. It loops. It haunts. And every so often, it opens a door and drags you backward. Because on this day, under a cloudless sky, you hear a name that should be dead, Sejanus, spoken in a whisper, by a soldier who doesn't know you're listening. The name shouldn't echo anymore, but it does. And with it, so does everything you remember about the ghost of Sejanus. Lucius Aelius Sejanus, Praetorian Prefect, second only to the emperor himself. Charismatic, strategic, dangerous. A man who didn't just rise, he levitated. For years under Tiberius, Sejanus was the empire, in all but name. And then one day, he was dust. You were there when the rumors began. Not at the center of power, never that lucky, but close enough to hear doors slam just a little harder. Close enough to watch senators sweat in their sandals. Close enough to see slaves running with messages that disappeared into flames. Sejanus had built his power like a spiderweb carefully, invisibly. He controlled the guard, whispered into the emperor's ear. Arranged marriages, exiles, even deaths. And then, almost overnight, the emperor turned. Tiberius sent a letter, a quiet one, read aloud in the Senate. No fanfare. And just like that, Sejanus wasn't the empire's golden voice. He was its target. He was dragged from his chair, stripped, choked to death, his statues shattered. His children were executed. Even his lovers were hunted. No one mourned aloud, but Rome twitched for weeks, like a beast stung in the spine. Historians still argue whether Tiberius planned the fall all along, or simply panicked when Sejanus grew too popular. Some believe it was divine justice. Others think the Senate, tired of being ruled by a guard captain, nudged the emperor into action. One fringe theory claims Sejanus knew it was coming and allowed it, hoping death would preserve him as legend. You think Rome panics when its mirrors start speaking? And Sejanus was the clearest mirror Rome had ever faced ambition without heritage. Power without precedent. Influence without permission. He made the mistake of believing Rome would let him keep it. But even after death, he wouldn't go away. His name was scraped off walls, his deeds reassigned to others. But stories of him crept back in. Tales of letters he wrote that still circled the city, of ledges only he could decrypt, of guards still loyal to his ghost. You remember a week when anyone associated with him suddenly fell ill or left town? One senator leapt into the Tiber. Another boarded a ship and never returned. Their statues crumbled. Their wills were contested. Whole families became past tense. And the truly cursed ones, Those were the ones who had praised him publicly. You knew a man like that once? Modest. Plain. Never ambitious. But one speech, one toast to the wisdom of Sejanus was all it took. Years later, long after the prefect's bones had rotted, that man was summoned, tried, and executed. Retroactive treason. The Empire is very good at finding new meanings in old words. And now, somehow, the name has returned. You hear it more than once. A child repeating it while mocking a play. A street performer making vague jokes about a man who flew too close. Even a tavern drunk shouting, "Better to be Sejanus than his dinner guest." Why now? Why again, you know why? Because Rome is repeating itself. Again. Someone new is rising too quickly. Someone has too many favors. Too many guards. Too few enemies. And the Senate smells it. The Emperor feels it. The scribes sharpen their pens. And in this, you feel your own shape forming again, because the pattern is always the same. Rise. Admiration. Fear. Whispers. Erasure. Sejanus was not the first. He won't be the last. He was merely the clearest warning Rome ever gave to those who climb too far. Too fast. And forget that the marble beneath them is also a trapdoor. You sit by your fig tree that evening and write his name in the dirt. Just once. Sejanus. You stare at it, then you wipe it away. Because if Rome taught you anything, it's that names carry weight. And this one still echoes. Even now. Especially now. You receive a scroll. No seal. No. Introduction. No signature. Just 8 words. Written in a tight, anxious hand. Do you still have the papyrus from before? Your hand tightens around the reed paper? Not because of the question, but because of the assumption. Someone knows. Someone remembers. Someone believes you kept it. And they're right. Buried under the fig tree, with the others, covered in wax cloth and hidden beneath a pile of garden stones, you arranged to look like nothing at all. So yes, you still have it. But the better question is, why do they care now? Because in Rome, when they come asking about old documents, it means someone's building a case or burning one. Welcome to the world of papyrus and peril. In a society where most people can't read, and even fewer are allowed to write freely, papyrus is not just parchment. It's potential. It's power. Rome runs on scrolls, petitions, edicts, receipts, ledgers, decrees. A single line in a Senate transcript could end a career. A half-true love letter could be twisted into treason. A shipping manifest could expose a smuggling ring that runs straight through a general's purse. And that's why the most dangerous thing a political prisoner can possess is a document. You remember the first time you saw a letter get someone killed? It was short, just a few lines. A merchant's report, noting a delay in grain shipments. But in the margins was a scroll. Almost a joke. Don't let the emperor know he'll raise the taxes again. That scrap ended up in a delator's hands. Within a week, the merchant was arrested. Not for grain delays, for contempt. Historians still argue whether the rise of the Roman paper trail was a step toward bureaucratic brilliance or a tool of creeping surveillance. Some praise it as a triumph of administration. Others point to the quiet weaponization of memory. One fringe theory claims entire departments existed solely to intercept and revise correspondence Rome's first censors. Not of morality, but of momentum. You wouldn't be surprised. You once had a friend, an archivist, who catalogued political speeches. He told you, with a smile too, forced to be sincere, that two versions of every speech existed. One for the audience, one for the archive. History, he said, depends on where you store it. And now, someone wants what you stored. You dig up the jar that night? The scroll in question isn't the most damning, but it is the most curious. A copy of your own trial record's not the official version, but the draft, stolen by someone who pitied you enough to slip it through a window years ago. It includes notes in the margins, alternate charges, lines cut for tone, names replaced. One note reads, "Too strong, consider changing to inappropriate conduct." Another, "Don't mention the grain vote too recent." It's not just a document. It's a confession. Not of your guilt, of their process. And now, it seems, someone else knows it still exists. The next day, another letter arrives. No greeting, just a quote. "Truth fears not the papyrus." But the reader, and suddenly, you're reminded, information in Rome has no fixed meaning. It's a sword with too many hilts. What matters isn't the truth. It's who gets to wield it. You don't sleep that night. You stare at the scroll. You imagine handing it over. Imagine the consequences: riots, revenge, maybe even reform. But you also imagine betrayal. You've lived long enough to know that scrolls often become shields for the same hands that once wielded the knife. So instead, you do something else. You copy it. Not word for word. Not fully. Just the notes. The important parts. You bury the original again. Deeper this time. Beneath the oldest roots. You seal the copy inside a wax tablet and place it in your walking cloak. You don't know what you'll do with it. But you know one thing. If they want to use it, they'll have to go through you. Because papyrus may tear, but memory has teeth. You leave before dawn, not out of fear, not entirely, but because some things must be handled in person. Scrolls, for all their power, are only potential. They're whispers waiting for lungs. And you've carried these whispers too long. It's time to see who else still listens. The city has changed. Or maybe you have. The forums feel smaller. The statues look newer, replaced, perhaps, or scrubbed, until their faces forget the crimes they were built upon. New names chiseled into old marble. New triumphs covering ancient cracks. The illusion of eternity. Flickering on a fresh plaster. You move through it like a shadow. You don't use your old name. You don't linger where you were known. You take back alleys and side roads. Navigating Rome, not as a citizen, but as a ghost returned. You make your way toward the prison of silence. No, not the Tullianum. This place doesn't have a name. It doesn't appear on maps or official rosters. It's a villa half-burned, half rebuilt, tucked behind a disused aqueduct near the Aventine. A quiet building where those who still breathe are kept from speaking. Not criminals, not exiles, but men and women with dangerous knowledge, the kind that doesn't fade. And you know this because once, many years ago, someone tried to send you here. You escaped the paperwork. Barely. You arrived with nothing but the wax tablet tucked in your sleeve. A letter of introduction, a false one, got you past the gate? The guards are indifferent. This is a place designed not to resist intrusion, but to ensure no one wants to stay. Inside, it's colder than you remember. Rooms lined with thick curtains instead of doors. Soundproofing. Maybe, or just for the pretense of privacy. You're shown into a chamber where a woman sits cross-legged on the floor, staring at her hands like they're foreign things. Her name is Septimia. Or was. She once worked in the Senate archives. A copyist. Brilliant. Kiet. Too observant. She memorized things she wasn't supposed to. Not facts, patterns. She saw how votes shifted before they were counted. How words were removed and added before records were sealed. And when she tried to speak, she was reassigned. That was 15 years ago. She doesn't recognize you. But she looks up, blinks slowly. Her voice is hoarse. Do they still write the same lies, she asks? You don't answer. You just kneel beside her and unwrap the wax tablet. She reads, silent. Then, once again. Then a third time, lips trembling. Finally, she speaks. You've kept this safe. You nod? She places a hand over yours, not for comfort. But to still it, then it was worth being forgotten. Historians still debate whether such places ever existed. Quiet villas hidden in plain sight, where Rome kept those too valuable to kill, too dangerous to release. Some believe they were retirement homes for madmen. Others think they were hospitals for the politically contaminated. One fringe theory claims they were listening posts full of half-mad prophets whispering into hidden scrolls. Their visions encoded into tax records and temple calendars. You're not sure which is worse, that such places existed, or that they were necessary. You leave the wax tablet with her, not because you trust her, but because she, too, has lasted. And sometimes, what survives is more sacred than what is true. Outside, the air smells of olives and old ash. A crow watches you from the roof. Head cocked, as if to say, well, did you fix it? You smile? Not yet. But the silence is shifting. You can feel it. You return to the city a different shape. Not thinner. Not older, though. Both are true, but less visible. Like a smudge rubbed into parchment. Rome passes through you now. Its noise skims your skin. Its crowds bend around you like water. No one stops. No one questions. You are not a man. You are a silence that walks. And that is exactly what you need. Because now you're ready to revisit the past that tried to bury you, the one place that still makes your breath shallow and your hands twitch. The place where it all began. The Senate House. You don't enter. Not yet. Just linger on the fringes. From behind a column, you watch the togaed men shuffle in. Some young and nervous. Others old and swollen with self-importance. A few of the names you still recognize. Their mouths move like actors delivering lines in a farce, too well rehearsed to be funny. And you wonder, do they know how many graves their debates have filled? There's one man in particular you're watching. A pontifex now. Silver-haired. But not wise. Years ago, he sat on the tribunal that condemned you. He didn't speak then. He didn't need to. His silence was a sword. His nod, a nail in the coffin. He passes within feet of you, pausing to adjust his robe. Your eyes meet. Nothing. No recognition. No flicker of guilt. Just another day for him. Another robe. Another vote. And somehow, that hurts more than memory. Because this is how Rome wins, not by force, not by truth, but by outlasting what it ruins. You follow the Pontifex not to threaten him, not to shame him, but to study him. See what time has made of the men who once bent your name into a curse? He walks to a nearby archive, an annex for preserved senatorial records. You didn't even know it still existed. And that's when something strange happens. He argues with a scribe. Not loudly, but sharply. You hear only fragments? No. That scroll was never corrected. It was presented. Why isn't it here? I chaired that tribunal. I remember what was said. And then, the killing phrase, "There must have been a copy." You retreat into shadow, heart slow and heavy. So he does remember. Not you, but your scroll? The one you buried? The one now in the hands of Septimia. If she still breathes. The one they thought had been destroyed after your trial, but which somehow, impossibly, has begun to resurface. Historians still argue about how much power individual scrolls really had in Rome. Some say the empire was too vast, too chaotic, too layered with contradiction for one document to mean anything. Others insist the right line, in the right hand, could undo 10 years of tyranny. One fringe theory even claims that certain library imperial copyists smuggled alternate versions of trials and votes into hidden libraries across the provinces, building a secret record of Rome's lies. You don't know which theory is true, but you do know this. Someone is looking for the truth you thought was buried. And that means someone, somewhere, is terrified. You spend the next 3 days walking the city by night, watching, listening. You visit the bathhouses, the outer forums, even the temples. You notice the change of tightness in the way officials speak. A hesitation when certain topics arise. A senator's nephew is arrested. A historian's home is searched. A scroll collector is found dead in his atrium. His archive mysteriously damaged by flood. No rain that day. You understand what's happening. The Empire is doing what it does best, closing the walls. Quietly, efficiently, preparing for something it doesn't yet understand, but deeply fears. And you become the stone in its shoe, the whisper it can't trace, the memory it failed to erase. You don't plan revenge. Not exactly, but you write again. Short phrases, hints, quotes from your trial, sent anonymously to men who still pretend they sleep well. Some deny receiving them, others lose sleep. One flees the city, and for the first time in years, you feel something that isn't dread. You feel balance, because Rome may command armies, dictate, law, build monuments, but it cannot force the people it crushed to forget. You are still here. And now, Rome knows it. You no longer count the scrolls. You count the responses. One senator collapses mid-speech. Heart failure, they say. Another retires suddenly, citing health. A third begins attending temple rituals every day. Eyes darting, fingers twitching at every cough behind him. You walk through these reactions like a man strolling through a mosaic he helped design, because now, the scrolls are no longer yours alone. Septimia has begun copying them. You don't know how, or where. You only know it's happening because fragments of your trial are resurfacing. Not in forums, not in courts, but in the margins of plays, in whispered lectures, In the fictional dialogues of traveling poets who perform just far enough from Rome's reach to be noticed but not crushed, and that's when Rome does what it always does when information leaks. It pretends to forgive. An official arrives at your gate one evening, just before sundown. A young man, barely 30, perfect posture, clean tunic, the kind of face Rome sends when it wants to look gentle while tightening the noose. He smiles. Word has reached the Senate. He says that your previous sentence may have been premature. You don't speak. He produces a scroll, offers it like a gift. A formal pardon, your status restored, a small pension, the return of your family's name to the records. He waits, and you understand this is not amnesty. It's containment. They want to call you back in, so they can control the narrative. Erase your current danger with the illusion of dignity. Fold your rebellion into the official record, domesticated, defanged. You stare at the seal, the same wax, the same ribbon, the same flourish that once consigned you to silence. You say nothing, but in your silence, he understands. His smile falters. He leaves without another word. Historians still debate whether these late pardons were sincere or strategic. Some claim they were genuine efforts at justice. Others say they were designed to erase threats by embracing them. A fringe theory insists that pardoned individuals were often poisoned within a year because once they re-entered society, the danger of their popularity resurfaced. You burn the scroll that night, not out of anger, but as a signal. You are not re-entering the narrative. You are writing a new one, and Rome is beginning to realize that because soon, the deaths are no longer quiet. It begins with a body face down in the Tiber, arms bound with gold thread rope, a signature Rome hasn't used since the Republic. The corpse floats ashore near the fish market, where peasants gather like crows. It takes hours before anyone dares to report it. No one wants to touch a message. The body belongs to a retired imperial censor. He once signed the scrolls that redacted your name. Now, his lips are gone. The city goes quiet, but not with fear. With curiosity. You can feel it in the streets. People speak softer, not because they're afraid, but because they're listening. Something is happening, and it feels different. Not rebellion, not revolution. Something subtler. You call it the return of memory. You begin hearing your own phrases, once buried on the lips of strangers. A child recites a line from your trial as a riddle. A vendor uses one of your speeches as a haggling joke. An old beggar in front of the baths sings your metaphor about chains that shine brighter than laurels. The irony. None of them know it came from you. Because this isn't about identity anymore. It's about ideas. And Rome is terrified of ideas that don't need names to survive. That's when the empire starts flailing. Arrests, raids, interrogations, priests questioned, librarians whipped, scrolls confiscated in bulk. The archives declare a review period code for purge. You see smoke curling from the archive towers? Ink and memory rising together. You smile, because they are too late. Historians still argue about what caused this panic. Some say it was political infighting, a failed tax reform blamed on radicals. Others believe it was the accidental exposure of falsified legal records. One fringe theory insists a child discovered a hidden document while playing in an abandoned estate and recited it aloud in a public bath. But the truth, Rome is not panicking because of what was found. It is panicking because of what can't be undone. Memory, once shared, cannot be burned. You walk the streets like a gardener, watching old seeds sprout, and for the first time, you wonder, maybe survival wasn't the goal. Maybe it was transmission. Nightfall in Rome used to be silence. Now, it hums, not loudly, not with torches or mobs, but with murmur. Words traded like coins. Phrases passed like prayers. You hear scraps everywhere now. From slaves, from soldiers, from schoolboys, and in them, you hear yourself. Not quoted, not exactly. Twisted, adapted, evolved, but the rhythm is yours. You visit the forum at night and see chalk scrawls along the base of pillars. Chains. Gilded are chains still. The empire forgets. But stones, remember? His name was scratched. His voice was not. You touch one of the walls and feel it vibrate. Faintly. Memory has weight. And that weight is turning. You hear from Septimia again. Not in person. A scroll arrives. Unsigned. But the wax is dusted with fig pollen. And the writing carries her lean impatience. I have done what I can. It is spreading. I do not need them to remember me. But I will make sure they remember us. She's not just copying anymore. She's teaching others to copy. The scrolls, the tribunal transcripts, the hidden letters, they are being distributed. Not as relics, but as scripture. It's no longer a rebellion. It's a curriculum. And that is the moment Rome crosses the line. They stop looking for documents. They start looking for people. You watch it happen in waves. A street poet goes missing after performing a satire too close to a senator's career. A baker is arrested for wrapping bread in old scroll fragments. A child is whipped in the square for quoting a line about law drawn in ash. The raids come faster, cruder, less coordinated, less légal, because when an empire starts to fear its own citizens' memory, it loses the illusion of control. Historians still argue what this moment marked the start of a cultural collapse, a generational shift. Some say it was the quiet beginning of the philosophical movements that would later undermine Roman political theology. Others believe it ended in fire. A fringe theory even claims this was the first literate uprising, one built not on swords. But en cotation. But you know better. This wasn't a revolution. This was Rome, choking on the words it once silenced. And you're no longer part of it. You're its catalyst. You don't run. You don't hide. You simply move a little slower now. Like a man watching the storm finally arrive after years of reading the wind. And in the eye of it, you feel something no one expects in the midst of upheaval. Relief? Because this is not your storm anymore. It belongs to the ones who heard you, the ones who remembered, and Rome, in all its granite certainty, is starting to crack. You see it in the way senators whisper behind closed doors, in how magistrates bring scrolls to temple altars, not to read, but to burn, in how guards no longer enforce silence with confidence, but with urgency, because they are not just chasing you anymore. They are chasing a language that now lives in others. You've passed through enough histories to know this Rome can kill a man, but it cannot unthink a thought. So you begin preparing. Not to die. To fade properly, You gather your final records, those you haven't already entrusted. You write not a confession, but a guide. A series of meditations, how to speak without being heard, how to survive without agreeing, how to erase yourself so that others cannot. And then, you write one final thing. Let them erase my name. But let the words remain beneath the stone. You seal it. You bury it not under the fig tree, but in the stone base of a dry fountain near the Temple of Concord, the place where you once stood, a lifetime ago, and believed in justice. Historians still argue, if that final writing ever existed, no record of it was ever formally entered into the archive. But centuries later, inscriptions found under that very fountain contained phrases matching your known cadence. No name, no author, just the voice. And that's enough. Because now, people stop you in the street not to accuse you, not to whisper, but to quote you back to yourself. And they have no idea it's you. That's the moment you exhale. You are no longer the prisoner. You are the echo. And Rome can't put shackles on an echo. Somewhere across the city, a name is chiseled back into stone. You don't see it happen. You only hear the rhythm of it, the slow, careful tap of hammer to marble, as if the stonemason is afraid to wake the empire itself. You pass by hours later, cloaked and unhurried. The dust still clings to the base. And there it is, your name, partially restored. One letter crooked, another carved too deep. As if even now, the act of remembering is met with trembling hands. You do not smile, because this isn't justice. This is strategy. Rome doesn't apologize. It adjusts. It recognizes that forgetting you has failed. So now, it pretends you were never truly gone. As if you simply took a long sabbatical from the public record. They call it rectification. A senatorial decree, buried among 23 others. A statement of historical clarification that mentions no trial, no exile, no silence. Just a note, he served the Republic with distinction. Historians still argue what prompted the restoration. Some say it was public pressure. Others point to a new generation of senators trying to distance themselves from older blood. A fringe theory claims it was not an act of conscience at all, but a bargain in exchange for the quiet retirement of certain accusations still floating in poetic verse and temple graffiti. You watch your name appear again? On scrolls. In conversation. Even in a footnote of a tax reform debate, but it no longer feels like yours. It belongs now to them scrubbed. Softened. Reconstructed. They use it to signal fairness. They use it as proof of the empire's capacity to forgive. And yet, there's a catch. Because your words, the ones whispered in shadow, carved into benches, sung by children, they remain unchanged. Still sharp. Still disruptive. Still yours. Rome may reclaim your name, but it cannot own your echo. You walk by that fountain again, the one where your final writing is hidden beneath the stone. A group of youths gather nearby, debating. You catch only the end of the sentence, and if law serves only power, it is not law. The speaker doesn't know the origin. He thinks it's from a play, and you feel no need to correct him? Because this is the victory. Not survival. Circulation. You wake in the middle of the night to voices outside your door. Not guards. Not assassins. Students. Young. Stupid. Fearless students. They gather quietly. 4. Maybe 5. They know who you are. Or they think they do. One calls you Master. Another calls you the last senator. You correct neither. They come not with petitions or praise, but with questions. They ask, what was the law like when it meant something? How did Rome forget itself? How did you survive? You pour them tea. You sit on the floor with them. And slowly, cautiously, you answer, not in speeches, in stories. You tell them about the delatores, the whispered accusations, the trial you never had, the poison you didn't drink, the scrolls buried in dirt. You show them where the fig tree grows. You say nothing of the jar beneath it. They listen, eyes wide, mouths silent, not taking notes, but absorbing. And as the night deepens, so does their awe not of you, but of the fact that truth survived. They ask if they can write your words down. You tell them no. You tell them to rewrite them themselves. Historians still argue about whether any formal school of philosophy was founded in your name. Some claim the Echoists, a short-lived movement that worshipped memory over monument, were your direct disciples. Others suggest your followers simply adopted your silence, passing your teachings mouth to ear, generation to generation. One fringe theory claims a surviving scroll, now lost, contained coded meditations attributed to the man Rome could not unmake. But you don't need a school. You have a ripple, and it spreads. Days later, one of the students is arrested. You hear about it from a butcher. Apparently, the boy quoted a phrase during a town meeting about grain tariffs. What is legality without justice but marble painted with ash? The magistrate called it sedition. You know the magistrate. You remember when he was a boy? Barely tall enough to reach the forum steps. Now, he enforces silence. And you know what happens next? Rome will not allow the ripple to widen. So it comes again, not with scrolls, not with speeches, but with a quiet warning. A guard arrives at your door. No helmet, no sword, just one phrase. Leave the city? Tonight? You nod? You knew it was coming, and you are not afraid, because Rome still thinks you are a man. It has not yet realized you are the wind. You walk away. No carriage, no procession, just footsteps over stone and dust. Your cloak is thin, the road is long, but the air is sweet with knowing. Not triumph, not bitterness, just the quiet weight of having endured. You leave through the southern gate, as instructed, but once you pass beyond the city's breadth, you do not follow the road to the coast. You turn inland, toward the hills, toward obscurity. Not to hide, to watch. You settle in a village with no name worth recording. A place where the wind moves slower, and the olive trees lean like old philosophers. You trade your history for silence. You become a stranger with kind eyes. You fix roofs. You grow herbs. You tell no one where you came from, but the children know. They sense it. In the way you listen, in the way you answer questions with questions, in the way you look at scrolls, like they're alive. And slowly, word returns. From the city, Rome is changing again. Not loudly, not nobly, but inevitably, a new tribunal has opened an inquiry into false trials from past decades. A senator quotes your phrasing clumsily, but with sincerity. A new teacher in the capital claims his methods are based on the lost man's ethics. A slave's story, once hidden in a kitchen ledger, is now recited in forums as parable. You don't claim credit. You don't write your name. But you sit beneath a tree, not a fig. This time, but a quiet almond grove, and you let the news breathe through you. Historians still debate your fate. Some claim you died in exile. Quietly, under an alias. Others believe you returned in disguise, guiding younger men through coded teachings. One fringe theory claims you outlived every emperor of your generation, disappearing only when your final student finally whispered your last lesson to a friend. The truth. You do not care what they believe, because by now, you are not a story. You are the storyteller, and that is more dangerous than any scroll Rome ever burned. The seasons pass without ceremony. Rain comes. The almond blossoms fall. A child is born in the village and named for a star no one can see from here. Life continues. Not loud. Not hurried. Just forward. And you, sitting under the same tree, listening to the wind scratch against stone, realize something profound. Rome has stopped chasing you. Not because it has forgiven you, but because it can't reach you. Because in truth, it's not just the city you left behind. You've stepped out of its frame. You're no longer part of the machine, no longer a threat. A record. A warning. You are the consequence it cannot contain. And now, you start to write again. Not for Rome, not even for the future. For yourself. A record, not of what happened, but how it felt. How fear carved grooves in your breath. How silence grew like moss inside your bones. How you learned that the cruelest form of control was not pain, but forgetting. You write it all. Then you stop. Not because the story is finished, but because, finally, you understand it? The scrolls you buried beneath the fig tree, someone digs them up one day. You don't know who. You only hear whispers of a merchant's daughter selling fragments, of a disgraced librarian assembling the phrases like a broken poem, of a foreign student stitching your words into a treaty thousands of miles away. You aren't remembered as you were. You are remembered as you became. Historians still argue whether your final scrolls were real. Some claim they were forgeries fabricated centuries later. Others believe they are the foundation of the anti-tyranny writings that ripple through late imperial thought. One fringe theory even suggests your words were encoded into prayers, passed secretly in early Christian circles. Long before the empire noticed, but the truth, it doesn't matter. Because history is not about what survives. It's about what continues. And your voice disguised, distorted, whispered, through time, is still speaking. Even now. Especially now. The night is long. Cool. Still. The kind of night that wraps itself around your ribs and slows your breath. You lie in a small wooden house tucked between two hills. The wind moving gently through the window. A candle flickers nearby. Its flame bowing without fear. You are alone, but not lonely. Because now, the silence feels different. It's not the silence of the cell, or the island, or the guarded villa. This silence does not threaten. It listens, and in it, you begin to let go. You think of all the names that were scratched away, all the truths that lived longer than their authors, all the trials that never had verdicts, and you realize Rome did not defeat you. It tried to forget you. And instead, you became remembering itself. Your last thought, as your body grows heavy with sleep, is of the fountain. Not the one with the scroll beneath it. The one you never found. The one you dreamed of, the place where truth flowed freely. And no hand dared to poison it. Perhaps it never existed. Perhaps it always did. And now, as your breath slows, you don't need to decide. Because your story doesn't end with you. It ends after you. With the next voice, the next whisper, the next prisoner who chooses to speak. And that is enough. That is more than enough. The candle's flame fades now. The story closes. Not with fire or fury, but with quiet. Let it wash over you. Let the dust settle again in the forum, where statues have long forgotten the voices that once stood beneath them. Let the fig tree grow, its roots deep in the soil of memory. Let the scrolls remain unread. For now, hidden beneath the hum of leaves and centuries. Because what mattered most was never the law or the empire. Never the trials or the prisons. It was this that someone saw, that someone heard, that someone you were willing to walk beside the prisoner down that long corridor of silence. Until at last, the echo reached daylight. So as the world sleeps and the noise of the day fades into the hush of thought, know that you are part of something greater. Not a rebellion, not a war, a remembrance. A whisper kept alive in parchment, in stone, in wind. So sleep now, with the quiet weight of truth beside you. Let it breathe, let it rest, because tomorrow, another story begins, and maybe, just maybe, it will start with a fig tree. A hidden scroll, and a name that Rome could not erase.